Clarky,
Rhys,
welcome, mate.
thanks for having me.
I'm very excited about today. We've got, a range of questions, and I guess we spend a lot of our time here in Australia reading, listening, learning about everything that's going on in the United States, from the congressional hearing, the disclosure process, crash retrievals, that sometimes it kind of overshadows how much of a worldwide phenomenon the UFO topic really is, especially here in Australia, where there is such a rich history and there is so much activity going on, as you and I well know. But it's actually someone like yourself who's here with boots on the ground that goes out and investigates these things. Now, we can't really talk a little bit about, who you work for and some of the organisations, but what I wanted to do to start with was just sort of, if you could talk a little bit about how you got involved in the UFO topic and became an investigator as well.
Oh, look, I'd love to, and you're quite right. I mean, I think in Australia we're a little bit camera shy. I think we're a little bit modest. We're not as vocal as perhaps as our American cousins tend to be. But you're exactly right. I mean, going back thousands and thousands of years here, as evidenced by, Indigenous Australians, we've got a rich history of high strangeness and lights and other phenomena that's recorded through their culture. And then obviously going back to, your connection in Woomera, all the special programs going back to the 40s and 50s, all the nefarious clandestine organisations that have been active here in Australia. I think there's lots to discuss, and there's lots of people here that are involved on the quiet. We're going to try and shake them out and talk about it. But yeah, I'm happy to sort of tell my story today and sort of, I suppose, speak about why I think it's an important topic and why we need to talk about it more and encourage more people to discuss it.
Yeah.
So my story really began, at an early age. I was sort of interested in it. I was talking to my wife about this the other day. I can't really ever remember a time when I thought that the topic wasn't factual. It seemed really obvious to me that we weren't alone. It just didn't make any sense to me that we would be. And I had a number of strange experiences when I was a kid. My family came out of Scotland and Europe, and they sort of mentioned, what we would describe as, colloquial high strangeness stuff, fairy tales and visitations and things like that, up until recently hasn't really been associated with this topic. They had a line drawn down the middle, but now we're sort of starting to see them come and coalesce back together. And so I suppose just as a young kid, I was open to magic, I suppose, strange things that we couldn't understand. And then when I was 14, what really changed for me is my brother and I witnessed what is best described, I suppose, as a being that traversed up a hillside at like lightning pace and in a really unnatural sort of way. And we only watched it for about a minute, but it reminded me of what the Ariel school children described about a being skipping through time and moving really quick. And it was over in a flash. It was less than a minute, and as a child it was a hard memory to grasp, and we told our parents and no one listened, but it was always in us. And then my brother and I sort of spoke about this, and we had a friend that used to be able to run that hill in about 18 minutes. He was a triathlete, fit as. He could go from the bottom to the top, and 18 minutes was his personal best. We watched this thing do it, in under a minute. So we mounted an expedition, we put on backpacks, we walked to the bottom of the hill in 40-degree heat and climbed, and we got to within probably 50 metres of the crest of the hill, and we both stopped and looked at each other. And we found that we were overwhelmed with, at the time I didn't understand, I felt like it was cowardice at the time, but it was like a sombre feeling. We both looked at each other after putting all this work in to get up to the hill. And I said, I don't want to go over there. And he parroted that straight back, and we turned around after all the effort and went back down. And I often thought about that moment. I sort of felt that it was we sort of had fear about it, but I felt that same feeling later on in life when I had the experience we're going to be talking about today. And so now I sort of recognise it a little bit more for what it was. So that was kind of my entree into believing that extraordinary things could happen, because I had seen something that I couldn't adequately explain or compartmentalise in any way that made sense. So that was sort of the first experience. And then I had a number of other things, the same as a lot of other people do, shooting stars that stop and change direction, and other strange, but nothing terribly profound. And then the experience that, we've spoken about before that we're going to be covering happened to me on the 1st of February 2023. I was already involved in this topic, working as a researcher. I was already deeply involved, read all the books, listening to podcasts, really becoming entrenched in it, but from a hands-off perspective. But everything changed for me, and I had like a new purpose once I had that experience. And what happened was, in the most basic sort of terms, is we were up there at the Dulux factory. My son was about to start a new business, and so we were up there doing a course, and we were staying in the golf club overlooking the Tuggerah Lake, which is like a saltwater inlet coming in out of the ocean. And about 9 o'clock at night, I sat on the balcony having a cup of tea, and I watched what I believed was an aircraft doing laps out over the ocean. And it was very unusual light. It was just a blinking light that pulsed very regularly, nothing terribly unusual, until I sort of looked on my Apple Watch and I sort of got where it was, and it was out to sea. And then I saw it do something amazing. It jumped about 20, 30 degrees in the sky, it just leapt and then leapt back. And I knew straight away I was watching something special. And that's kind of the start of the experience, is watching this orb do incredible things as it came in from the ocean. So I watched that object blink and become more energetic until it came sort of inland over the point. And then it ejected something out, but it was too far to really make it out very clearly. It was almost like a light artifact shooting out of it into the ground, and then it would go around again, and then all that stuff would go back into it, whatever it was. And then it really didn't do anything terribly anomalous at that point. It sort of just bumbled about, wobbling and carrying on, and then it started to blink a little bit more erratically and jumping around. And that's when I noticed there was a second one. So I watched the single light for about 10 minutes before it disappeared out of view. I went back inside and went, well, that's the end of my UFO experience. That was unusual. Made another cup of tea and went out. And then I noticed it had come back up on the horizon. This time it was heading towards me. And that's when it started behaving erratically. And I noticed there were two. And what was so strange about it was I got the distinct impression that it was like, it looked like two dogs off the leash at the park, chasing each other around and darting and looked like they were playing. And over the course of 20 minutes, I watched these things chase each other around, and eventually what they did is they came above the corner of my hotel, where I would estimate they were about 200 metres away, and they came together and they joined and made this giant wheel in the sky. And the wheel was formed by these two orbs coming together and lighting up, and then they would dash out, and there'd be a light artifact that left like a spoke, and then they'd light up. And they did that over and over again, and they formed like a 10 or 12 wheel spoke, sort of wheel that floated in the sky, and then it rolled up and then came apart. And it was absolutely incredible. Like, it was just, and I remember at the time thinking everyone around that area is going to be on their phones, on Facebook, it'll be on the front of the paper tomorrow. Like, it was astounding. This 200 to 300 metre high wheel of light spinning above the town was incredible, but nobody saw it, nobody mentioned it. And again, it's just one of those things that is also typical now that we know that investigating it, that quite often people see them alone and they're amazed that other people don't see them. So the wheel broke apart and the two orbs came apart. One went over the back of my hotel and I couldn't see it. And as it went over me, I got a really good look at it. And it literally was just a big ball of light without any sort of form, but large, about the size of probably a bus, I would say. And the other one went out to sea. And what was interesting about it is when it went out to sea, it would skip. So it maintained a heading where it went back out to sea, but what it would do is along the way, it would drop down or it would bounce around and go back to where it was. And it had this really erratic moment like it was skipping. So again, that went out to sea and I lost sight of them, and I thought that was the end of the experience, and it was amazing. And we'll come back to it because there's some interesting data points in there that we'll cover. But as an overview, I basically went in, and as you can probably guess by now, I made another cup of tea. And before I had gone back inside, I noticed there was a large object floating in the sky that kind of looked like swirling lava. But in my fervour for the moment, I thought, well, that could be a planet. It could be something else. Like, I'm in UFO mode now, so I could be jumping at shadows. So I just went inside and I calmed down and I made another cup of tea and I called my brother. And now this was coming on for about sort of 10 o'clock at night by this time. And I called my brother, he's in Arnhem Land, And I was flying to Arnhem Land from Sydney the following day to meet him there. And I called him up and I've just explained the experience and what I've seen. He's amazed. We're chatting about it. And as I walked out into the balcony with the phone in one hand and the cuppa in the other hand, I had that feeling again. The feeling that I had when I was a kid. It was like a somber dread. Like, I'm a pretty chipper person. I'm not used to feeling these feelings, and it felt icky and just this crushing sort of despair. It was a repulsive, repellent kind of feeling.
Did it feel imposed? Like, did it feel like
it's
external?
Yeah, and we can come back to that a little bit too, because there's, I want to look at it very skeptically as well, because also you're unaware of your own biology, and then it's easy to jump the shark and take a leap as well. And I think especially as a man, like, we're quite proud. I don't want to be, we don't like to admit to being scared or feeling these feelings. So we've got to be careful in that perspective that, I don't externalise that, and I can sort of own it and say, well, maybe it was me. But the weird thing was, I felt this feeling prior to knowing what I was heading into. And straight away, I recognised it as the same feeling I had when I was a kid at the top of that hill, the same feeling that said, go away, get away from here. So I walk out with my brother on the phone and the cup of tea in one hand, and I had that feeling, and I looked up. And when I looked up, I had the most awe-inspiring sight. Above me, there was a triangle that I could have hit with a bow and arrow. Couldn't have been much more than, 150 metres above me. And I would estimate it would be, 1 to 2 acres in size. But distance is hard. But definitely below any cloud cover. And what was unusual about it, and what was quite shocking, was that you hear stories about triangular craft, and almost exclusively they're described as almost like a technological object with a light on each corner, hard edge, hard to see. This thing was not like that at all. This thing looked like a sea creature. This had the minor irregularities that you would have in an organic creature. It sort of wasn't smooth, it was kind of lumpy. And the skin sort of had the texture like a snake or a lizard. It was kind of a dull brown and grey sort of colour, and it kind of had a weird texture through it that was hard to pick. The corners were round and soft, and then it came in at the corners slightly, so it wasn't a hard edge. It looked, for all intents and purposes, like something that you would see, like a three-legged starfish, something you'd see in the water. Organic, yeah. And I had, until that point, never really come across anything in my research that held up as being organic. I'd heard people speak of them, but I'd never seen anything or had any witness accounts that I found compelling about it being organic. But this thing to me had a feeling. When I stood underneath it, I experienced a fear that I have never felt before. And even every time, you can probably tell as I talk about it, sometimes I tense up.
On edge.
It kind of icks me out. And so the juxtaposition between the orbs, which for me was quite, we can talk about this as well, for me I found it like a divine experience. It was absolutely, I knew that I was looking at something that was just so far beyond what I had ever seen. I felt small, but I also felt liberated in seeing there was something better than us, something bigger than us. All the responsibility of the world isn't on us. And I also had what I would describe as an a-religious person, as an agnostic sort of person, as a divine experience. I felt like I was looking at something divine. Like it struck me, it affected me, but in a really positive way. And now, it's completely the opposite. Now I'm feeling scared, I'm feeling terrified, I'm completely in a world that I don't understand at this point. And my brother's on the phone. So I said to my brother, I said, holy shit, he wouldn't believe what I'm looking at. And he said, you got to hang up, you got to video it. And I said, there's no way I'm videoing this thing, which is strange for someone who does what I do. But I felt like there's no way, like I shouldn't be taking a video of this thing. I felt that way at the time. And he said, he goes, you're videoing it. And he hung up on me. So now I kind of feel alone with this bloody thing. And I went, yeah, right, I'm going to video it. So I got my camera out of my phone, and then I couldn't move my body. I felt like I was frozen. And
Physically?
Physically frozen, like I was being held, yeah. Like in, you know when you stick your head out a car window at 100 k's an hour and you get the buffeting? I felt like I was in that sort of buffeting and I couldn't move. And I'm quite a stubborn person. And I went, no, this is nonsense. So I had to contort my body and really fight to get the camera up. And I remember seeing the object and seeing the camera, and I'm twisted at a weird angle because I feel like I'm being held. And I took 3 videos of it, and they are the greatest UFO videos no one's ever seen. And so, strangely enough, after probably 30 or 40 seconds, it just seemed to phase out, and clouds just went almost comically, zip, like that, and came out of nowhere, and it just disappeared, but I still felt like it was there. So, literally 2 minutes ago, I was talking to my brother. So I'm like, now I'm ringing him. Like, I've got the best UFO video ever. It's creepy as hell. I'm going to ring him. So I ring him, and he doesn't answer. And I ring him, and he doesn't answer. And I ring and ring and ring and ring and ring. It doesn't get anywhere. And then I look at my phone, and it's 1:30 in the morning. So it's jumped from just after 10 to 1:30 in the morning. And instead of me logically putting that together, I went, oh, well, he's just gone to bed because it's late. I'll go to bed as well. And so I turned around and I went inside and I shut the door and I jumped into bed and that was it. It was so strange. So from there, how the experience unfolded from that point was I woke up at 4 a.m. because I had to get my son on a flight back to Albury where we live, and I had to get on a flight to Darwin. And I remember opening my eyes and the first thought that I had was mad panic. I was like, this is it, I've popped. I've had a nervous breakdown. I've been reading too much UFO stuff. I've been watching this, I've blown my family up. I've lost all my children. I've lost my wife. My business is gone. I'm going to be sleeping on the sidewalk using a shoe as a pillow. It's all over. And that was literally that's probably the greatest moment of fear I have ever experienced in my life. Is I literally considered the fact that I had lost my mind. And I got my son up. We got to the airport. And I remember the relief of sitting in my seat and opening my iPad, and it had uploaded overnight. And the videos of the orbs were there, so I knew that I had seen the orbs. And the relief that I had from that, I can't tell you, it was amazing. But then, funnily enough, the triangle videos weren't there. So, time I got to Darwin and I uploaded and got on the Wi-Fi and I scratched through all my files and nothing was there, couldn't find it. And then basically, those videos were deleted from the phone and they were deleted from the deleted bin as well. And then I started to question myself. Did I really see this? Is my imagination running away with me? Am I losing my mind? And we'll come back to it, but I've interviewed people that have had similar experiences, which actually gave me great comfort. So I was kind of rewarded for helping those people by having comfort myself. But funnily enough, 2 or 3 days later, I woke up and I remembered deleting the videos. I remembered standing on the balcony immediately following the event and finding the videos and deleting them, and then going to my deleted file and then deleting them from there. So that in some ways is the most traumatic part of the experience, because I felt like I didn't have control over my own actions.
Holy hecker. That's
not the word that I used. I speak a little French. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine there's just so many facets to that experience that kind of, I think, encapsulate what the UFO experience is about, which is quite incredible. The first thing I think I want to ask is, given how shocking this experience was and what you saw, do you think that this was almost some kind of display for yourself, like a showing in some sense of whatever this was to you? Like, did it feel like it was almost a presentation?
Yeah, look, that's a great question, And one of the things that we find when we're investigating, particularly through, say, MUFON, where we're interviewing just normal people that ring up, rather than out on a big investigation, is exactly that. People want to know why them. Because one of the things we come across really often is that people go, I saw this thing and everyone should have seen it. Or I was camping with 6 friends and we all saw it, and the next day 5 forgot about it. you get these kind of things coming through. One of the big things that we've got to be careful of, I think, is delusions of grandeur. Because as soon as you realise that nobody else saw it and you realise that it's about you, you're like, well, why did they pick me? And then all of a sudden, we've seen what happens when you let delusions of grandeur inflame your ego. So I think we've got to be really careful about, did it choose me? But what I could say confidently is that, did it come at a time in my life when I was ready for it? Yes, it did. Has it changed the course of my life and my family's life? Absolutely. And have I been able to use this experience to do good in the world and find a bit of meaning? Yeah, absolutely. So in a metaphysical or a spiritual sense, I feel like it came at the right time to give me a nudge. And some of the other things that I'd like to talk about is why I believe the experience was tailored to myself. And I might just jump into that now because I think it gives a bit of context. So I saw a triangle, which people have seen before. And stranger is that I saw the triangle in a spot where other people in the past, over the last 20 years around that area, the Terrigal sort of area, people have witnessed that type of craft in that location prior to me seeing it. So let's keep that in mind. Also, 2 weeks earlier I was in bed watching a documentary with my wife where hunters were describing being in the middle of the woods, out in the cabin, and one went outside for a smoke and he looked up and there's a triangle. And I remember saying to my wife and going, oh my God, can you imagine how terrifying that would be? And 2 weeks later, that's the experience that I had. So there's also that cultural references that these things tend to show themselves to people using their own cultural vernacular. So it's very unusual in that me making the comment about how terrifying it would be to stand beneath a black triangle 2 weeks prior then manifested. I always find that very unusual. The other thing too is in the weeks following the event, we talk about hitchhiker phenomena and we talk about the more that we look at it, the more it looks at you, those sort of things. 2 weeks later, and you've got to understand, I'm on my own ontological journey after this because I'm trying to see how this fits into the real world and how I sort of function moving forward knowing this. And I saw a leg behind the shed. I was in the gym actually. I was literally sweeping out the home gym, having a bit of a tidy up, and I looked and I saw a big tall white leg poking out from behind a wall, and it was almost identical shot for shot from the scene in the movie Signs where there's a leg in the cornfield and he looks at it and then it moves and disappears, which I've always found to be a creepy scene. And I felt like it was doing it knowing that, like it was drawing from my subconscious and, you know, playing with me. And I ran and chased it and tried to look around the corner and of course it pulled away and then went. But I kind of feel like some of these experiences are tailor-made for the individual to give them a nudge. And I don't know if I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, but I certainly feel like it's giving me a lot of purpose and a lot of meaning, and I'm trying to use the experience and the motivation it's given me to do good.
Yeah, I guess it's challenging probably a lot of worldviews right there in that experience, and you have to try and figure out first off, you know, with what you're experiencing, given that it is potentially drawing on your own subconscious to project or display something that's meant to have the greatest effect on you, what exactly does that mean? And what's the intention behind it? Something as well that's so fascinating about your experience is the idea that you filmed this giant triangle above your head, and that almost there's a memory missing, but there's a shard of it there though, where you can recall going into your inbox and deleting the video, and then deleting it from your recently deleted videos. And that's something which plays into slide 9, which we've heard a lot about. The idea that, you know, that was a briefing slide for the Deputy Secretary of Defence, a DIA, an ATIP slide about UFOs and their ability to possess psychotronic weapons, but to be able to manipulate biological organisms. When you say that you went in and you think you may have deleted that, do you think that the UFO has remotely taken control of you and it's somehow basically deleted those videos and you're switched off?
Yeah, absolutely. I think yes, and I think that's probably one of the most traumatic parts of it. We're adults, and we have control of our own destiny. And we spend our whole lives, from children into adulthood, learning how to take control of our lives. So when something takes control of you, or you have that impression, it's confronting. It's more confronting than anything else, is the fact that you feel like you've been on the end of someone else's string. And, as a study group of one, it doesn't hold any reference or power, really. It's a story without any evidence. But when you actually start to see this popping up more and more and more through witness accounts, you can start to go, this is happening a lot. Now, I would also preface that by saying that everyone that's had an experience seems to have 2 or 3 versions of their experience. And I certainly do. So if I'm telling someone who's outside the topic and they're interested, I will tell them about the orbs that come out of the ocean and the wheel and how amazing it was. Step 2 of the experience is probably telling people about the triangle. I don't tell very many people at all about the slide 9 type stuff, because it's confronting and it's scary and it's just outside most people's frame of reference. And so it's not something I talk about a lot. And I have found that when we see people that tell their story about anomalous phenomena, they tend to have 2 or 3 stories. And it's not until you scratch at the surface and you make them feel safe that sometimes they'll come out and they'll go, yeah, well, there was also this weird thing. Like the week after I saw that orb in the sky, I had a shadow standing at the end of my bed, or things like that that just seem so far removed from the initial experience that they don't mention it. But if you get into the weeds with experiences and you make them feel safe and you make them feel cared for, quite often you'll find that that's probably more common than we'd like to admit.
Yeah, as well with it, you've got that missing time aspect. And given that you are almost trying to recall a memory that's, it's really distorted, do you think that there is aspects to your encounter that have occurred that you cannot remember at all, like that maybe more happened within that period of time? Because you said you started filming at about 10, but then by the time you went to bed after you switched off the phone, how long was it were you think you were filming that triangle for?
Oh, I literally would have been filming it for 30 seconds.
And then nearly hours had gone by when the time to put your phone down.
3.5 hours. So where it gets tricky there, and there's a couple of things actually to unpack in that. So number one is that I missed 3.5 hours or whatever, give or take, which is unusual. What's even weirder is because I was there and the craft, or the object, let's call it, was there. But my brother, who's very reliable, we speak all the time, I've just told him I'm standing under a giant triangular UFO that's making me feel all these feelings. And then he just went to bed. And he never got a single phone call from me. He never received any of that sort of stuff. But he said the moment he hung up the phone, he and his wife felt really tired and they basically just went to bed. So it's also slide 9 at a distance. It's so out of character. It's also out of character that at 1:30, instead of shuddering in fear and going, oh my God, I've lost 3 hours, I just went, oh, I've got to be up in the morning, go to bed. So I really felt, and this is where I think, Jacques Vallée and people of that vein have the right idea that there is a system of control that we do not understand. And it's only in retrospect, looking back at it, that you sort of feel quite icky about it. In terms of the missing time, the obvious thing that people ask is, do you think you're abducted? And from that perspective, I don't even look at it. I don't even entertain the idea, because first and foremost, my duty is to be a husband and a father, and I've got to stay sane. If you go down the road of having regressive hypnotherapy, especially with a mind like yours, or mine that is so entrenched in the topic, creating a narrative is a big danger.
It's messy.
It's messy, and I could never ever trust the data that came out of it. It would give me something else to ponder that I would just be on the hamster wheel, and I think it would endanger my sanity. So I just have to put it in the unknown basket. And as you and I have discussed, and I think most people that research this topic seriously understand, is you better get used to not knowing things. You better get comfortable with contradictions. We've been existing in a world where there's no unifying theory between quantum physics and Newtonian physics. This is no different. We've got to get comfortable that there are contradictions within this phenomena that we just are unable to understand. And if you can't get your head around not knowing, you're best to sometimes leave it alone.
Yeah, there's a lot of unknowns, and it usually leads to more questions when you do find a data point or an answer as well. This very well could be something beyond us. This is something that I've thought about quite a lot, that we're dealing with things that may exist in a state that we just simply aren't biologically evolved to be able to process or understand.
I think that's absolutely the truth. I laugh. I say it's like an episode of Lost. Like you get one little answer and you get 17 more questions and it's never resolved. And I think that's kind of what it's like. But it's still, terrifically intriguing. It doesn't, once you're in, you can't get out.
It's fascinating.
But there definitely is, and that definitely where it gets into icky territory, is where the more you look at this, the more obvious it becomes that you're existing in a system of control. And we're living on a razor-thin slice of reality. It's like Donald Hoffman says, we haven't necessarily evolved to see reality. We've evolved to see the reality we need to survive.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's a big part of it. And if you look at it from, farm lab zoo hypothesis, which I think is along with simulation and other things, I think there's lots of little bits in all those theories that probably coalesce to form some kind of theory of everything. But if you're in a construct, you wouldn't be given the tools or necessarily the intelligence to be able to assess where you are. If you're in a fishbowl, you don't know whether you're on a bookshelf or on a piano. You've got no idea where you are. You've only got the tools to investigate what's inside that fishbowl. And I think that's kind of where we are.
Yeah, and I think even with the experience where you're talking about, your brother and his wife going to bed almost as if they've been sort of programmed to sort of shut off. And that's something you hear, remarkably in a lot of abduction cases where people in other places are almost turned off in a sense, and then that's when an incident may occur. And you sort of spoke a little bit to the Jacques Vallée analogy, the control system. Do you think that the UFO phenomenon, or whatever it is, do you think that is in complete control of our society and as individuals? Maybe not all the time, but it has some sort of agenda that's playing to a bigger plan that we aren't able to understand.
Yeah, I do. Look, my caveat on answering that sort of stuff, the bigger questions, is that I try not to believe anything. As humans, we like to ratchet knowledge on previous knowledge. And so we go, that's true, and then that's true, and we sort of build. But the problem is that our foundations are weak because we don't actually know what sort of construct we're living in. So for us to start ratcheting knowledge of what is and what isn't true is sort of flawed at the beginning. But in my experience, whatever the phenomena is, we can talk about what we think it is and all the different theories about it. It is in complete control of us. In saying that, I feel like we have a relationship with it, and I think that's evidenced through religion. I think that religion typically is, a construct in order to explain the phenomena through the appropriate cultural lens of where you live and where you've grown up. The basis, supreme sky beings that can do whatever they want whenever they want, isn't exactly a unique tale across the planet. It seems to be pretty common. So, but yeah, do I think that they have complete control? Yeah, absolutely. But again, where we fall into trouble is assigning the they. Is they one thing or is they 1,000 things? And again, if we are in a construct and you take the fishbowl and you turn it into a zoo enclosure, we're trying to find out all the mysteries and all the secrets and I suppose, be the master of our own enclosure. Well, we could be completely unaware. We could be surrounded by 1,000 other enclosures that are all trying to do the same thing. So that is one of the contradictions too, where the community pulls itself apart from these beings of love and light, and then there's cattle mutilations. Well, there's opposite ends of the spectrum. People that sort of claim abductions, can claim anything from support and angelic beings and love and light, and other people are terrified and have awful experiences that see them in and out of psychologist's office for the rest of their life. So I think we've got to drop our binary thinking when it comes to this. This is a muddle and a mess and a swirling soup of different thoughts and ideas that are contradictory in nature, but that shouldn't stop us moving forward and trying to investigate it.
I completely agree. Yeah, there really could be, you know, in terms of questions about what this is, a range of answers, in the sense that there's a spectrum of possibilities that which phenomena could exist, that we aren't able to perceive, that exist beyond our perception abilities.
Yeah.
And interesting when you speak about the contrast, where you have that sort of first experience with almost joyous divinity, which you would like equate, you said, to almost a religious experience. It almost sounds spiritual. And then the complete opposite, which is like staring into the abyss. It's dark, it's horrific.
Yeah.
And that was something you touched on as well, about, you know, potentially maybe these religious tales or myths around religion could be encounters with unexplained phenomena or non-human intelligence. Do you think that the phenomenon is potentially responsible for some religious interpretations based off their cultural understanding of the time?
No, I don't think they're responsible for some. I think it's probably responsible for all of it.
Wow.
I couldn't think of a single established religion or spiritual practice on the planet that doesn't have some connection to this. I mean, if we investigate it, we've got physical objects that are and have and continue to be recovered by blue chip companies like Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin. We know that. So there's stuff we can touch. We also know that there are people interacting with non-corporeal entities and everything in between. And so from my perspective, that pretty much covers religion across the board. I mean, the Old Testament, to pick something that we understand in our Western society quite well, or even if we look at, you know, any Abrahamic religion, if you read it through the lens of a UFO researcher, you know, it lands very differently. And, you know, the Old Testament, Exodus is fabulous. Like, Exodus is quite a spicy chapter. But, you know, God doesn't appear in Exodus as, you know, a bearded guy in a white flowing robe. He appears as a pillar of smoke or, you know, a fire in the sky. There is two forms that he takes in Exodus. That sounds pretty familiar to me from what we hear from people. So I do think that religion is the human way to try and compartmentalise and understand the phenomena. I don't think that it degrades religion at all. I don't think that it means that it's any less divine. I just think
it's just different interpretation.
I think the mistake we make is that we look back in history, probably because we watch too many Hollywood movies, and we look at these people in swords and sandals and we think that they had a lower IQ or us, or their critical thinking skills weren't as sharp as ours. I think it's exactly the opposite. I think knowledge and information has become cheapened, especially with the internet now. Information has lost its value. Back then, if someone's going to sit down and take the time to carve it into stone with a hammer and chisel, it was probably a relatively important event that they wanted to document. And I think in the vernacular and the cultural lens that these people were looking through, it was probably very real, very apt, and I think we should be looking at it with probably a much more open mindset than we do. In some way, we've tried to replace religion and spirituality with science, and now hubristically, science has become a religion of its own, where people don't want to go back at previous scientific discoveries and recalibrate, remeasure, check things out, and it has almost become dogmatic. Yeah, great word for it. It's become dogmatic, and I think Rupert Sheldrake gives a great TED talk on this, which breaks it down. You know, how are we going to make amazing discoveries unless we're open to amazing things? And people use Carl Sagan all the time. You know, extraordinary claims, require extraordinary evidence. Well, extraordinary claims really require extraordinary investigation. And I believe if Carl Sagan was alive today, he'd be right with us. So I think that's part of the issue is we need to open our minds. We need to be more respectful of the scholars of the past and really look and listen to what they were talking about and see if that's marrying up with what we're seeing today.
Yeah, that's a fantastic way to put it. There is, I guess, another side to it where we spoke a little bit there about the religious interpretations maybe being potentially encounters with a non-human intelligence or a phenomena that we don't understand.
Yeah.
One of the most fascinating aspects of UFOs and phenomenon that I believe really is the high strangeness that revolves around when people maybe sometimes encounter a UFO, are in an area where there is going to be an unknown experience. You get these mythic archetypes or folklore expressions occur, whether it could be an auditory display of a witch's cackle appearing around you and you're in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Or it could be the appearance of an apparition that's an archangel.
Well, the Archangel Michael appearing to Catholics and Christians in general makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
But the Archangel Michael appearing to people that have never had any religious upbringing experience or been exposed at all is another thing altogether, and that does happen. And I think Diana Walsh-Basalka has really covered that well in her books. And I've come across several experiences that have encountered what you would describe as the Archangel Michael, some of which didn't know what they were looking at. They just described it, and I knew though their descriptions were matching up what I'd heard from other people. And that is a really unusual thing. So is it a case of this is in the costume cupboard?
Yes.
And this is what we're putting on because this is what's worked before? I have no idea. And that's why, I mean, the phrase high strangeness is so apt because it is, you know, on one spectrum we've got dog people at Jay Stratton's house and then we've got dino beavers and, you know, everything in between. Like it is strange. And that again comes back to, I think that's why Rizwan's work's getting so much traction in terms of the
simulation.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think it's an elegant answer to it. Like it does, you know, you're living in someone else's construct and they can change the rules and rewind and fast forward and make it as strange as they like. And part of the hard thing to understand studying this topic is reality has, you know, it doesn't have to make sense to you. It's under no obligation to make sense. Which isn't exactly comforting.
Yeah, no, of course. And that's the thing about the phenomenon and UFOs. They don't make sense. That a lot of their displays, a lot of their behaviour, it doesn't seem to potentially follow a pattern that we can coherently put together to make a hypothesis that makes sense. And even there, what we're speaking about these mythic explorations, like you'll have Egyptian deities appearing or men with dog heads, and they have no cultural relevance to the individual that's seeing them. And it's the other aspect as well, which I think we have to touch on given your experience, is the Hitchhiker Effect.
Yeah.
Because that's something that I find just shocking. And there are so many people that have accounts of this where it's this idea where someone has an anomalous experience and they go home to their family and then almost like some sort of paranormal infection or spiritual transfer.
That's a great phrase, yeah.
Yeah, it gets the members within the family or people connected to them then start experiencing high strangeness or UFOs as well. What do you think that is?
Oh, look, again, I don't know. I don't know. But what I tend to think it is that, look, coming back in a broader sense, in why do we do this? Like, why is this important to me? Why is this important to you? Like, is it because it's a hobby? Is it because it's entertainment? Or is it because we think that it's something meaningful? And that becomes a problem. Because if it's meaningful, it becomes part of your ideology. And it means that in the face of adversity, people like you or I are going to forge forward. So the easiest way to quiet you down, you've made a decision to put yourself in harm's way or to take the risk, you know, of existential or ontological shock or whatever. But you can't be making that decision for your children or your family or whatever. So I think in a way it's a great way to quiet people down. And I think again, we talk a lot about how governments have and military industrial complex companies have threatened, cajoled and murdered people along the way. There's really 3 or 4 different ways to get what you want out of people. One is to buy them off. The second way is to threaten them. And the third way is to ideologically side with them, make them see a reason why they should act this way or the other, thinking it's in the best interest of everybody. Now, ideologically, you're going to be hard to manipulate. But if you see a family member suffering, you're probably in a position where you'll pull your head in. So I think the hitchhiker phenomena in some ways, and George Knapp has covered this, like George Knapp is quite happy to talk about any experience. He's a really brave sort of guy talking about this when it was ridiculous 40 years ago. But you'll notice when he talks about the Hitchhiker Effect and how it affected, I think, his wife.
Yeah.
He shuts down real quick. So I think that the Hitchhiker Effect is a method of control, but I don't understand why.
Yeah, so because it almost comes off as some sort of kind of entanglement, and it's like a defense mechanism to maybe scare people into not exploring this more.
Well,
potentially.
In saying that too, most of the Hitchhiker Effect we hear about is the negative thing, and I can't help thinking if the reason we hear about it is because it's negative. Because I've had Hitchhiker Effect, you could argue, in my family, where 2 of my children have had high strangeness events independent of me, but neither of them were negative.
Okay.
So, you know, not from a negative effect. There is also a Hitchhiker Effect appearing in families, and there is some evidence to, although I think it's a bit loose at the moment, but there is some evidence to say that it does run in families. People with certain blood types, people with certain genealogies, whether it's Celtic, Gaelic background, Native American background, Indonesian background, these people tend to have more experiences, allegedly. So does that mean that their family does as well? It could be something to do with that. But what seems to be strange about it is quite often these people don't have any experiences until they start working at said facility or have said experience, and then from then their families start to have it. I don't know. I think it's quite a daunting, confronting aspect of the phenomena, and it's something that I'm always keeping an eye out for. And I know that other people that you and I both know that are involved in this topic, that's probably their big fear as well. Is they're like, I'm prepared to charge forward and put myself in harm's way to, you know, try and push this out into the light, but I'll call full stop at my family.
And that's probably something I should ask as well, because you are going out there and investigating these cases, and when you're dealing with the unknown, especially with things that are extremely powerful and misunderstood, you have to take precautions with what you're doing. I think people that probably aren't well versed in the topic don't understand that there are real world consequences for diving headfirst into things that are really unknown. And with that, how do you assess a case and whether you can go there, or without obviously revealing too much about the specific case? How do you determine what the consequences could be if it is potentially dangerous or risky?
Look, that's a great question. I don't take a lot of precautions in terms of what I do. I evaluate it on its merits every single case, and I listen. I try and listen more than I talk when it comes to investigating. And if people tell me, like, there's a particular investigation that we're doing at the moment, and the locals have said, you know, this is the area where we see them all the time. And I said, look, I'll go and camp out there. And they went, we don't let any of the local kids camp there at all. Like, it's a no-no. And they sort of, they went on and spoke more about that. They elaborated, which is something that I can't do. I can't sort of tell you what they told me at this stage, but they convinced me. I was like, yeah, well, I'm not going to go camp out there. But in saying that too, do I take great precautions? No, I've been very lucky all my life. My interactions with the phenomena to this point have been solely benevolent. Even I would say the triangle situation that made me feel so, it didn't hurt me, but it did change the course of my life. But in saying that, I found meaning out of it. So I kind of almost think, like, you go back to your method of control, if it wanted me to pursue a certain life choices, it probably just moved the pieces around on the board to make me think, feel and behave in a certain way. And I kind of feel like that's probably the case. I feel like it nudges you. And I've spoken to other investigators and journalists that are knee-deep in this, such as yourself, and a lot of us feel like it just pushes you. So I find that I listen, and if I get a bad feeling, then I'll readdress it then. But in terms of saying, do I engage in spiritual practices or, you know, warding off stuff, I don't sort of do that. I just listen, and I sort of make a judgment based on what's happening. If it's a nefarious dark case where there's dark behaviour, I'll question whether I investigate it. I typically will not investigate anything that could be classed as a possession sort of case, or like malevolent entity activity. I think it's putting my family at risk, so I don't go near that.
Yeah, that's probably the right thing to do.
Yeah,
and that's something as well that people probably within the UFO field maybe get focused on the nuts and bolts a lot with this topic. but there is a lot of overlap with, whether it's the idea of the jinn or, a spiritual opposition that maybe represents a negative connotation.
Yeah.
And as I said, we don't really know what we're dealing with, whether it just presents itself like that or if it is something that is ancient and unknown.
Yeah.
But what do you think is the most interesting case you've investigated in your time?
I reckon, they're all interesting, The people are interesting. The witnesses are interesting. Obviously I do a lot of work with MUFON as well. And MUFON's interested in the nuts and the bolts and the data, which I think is really important. I don't necessarily think it's really important for now, but I think retrospectively looking back, that data is really great to have. But I think what's really... I think moving forward, the people are what make it interesting. How they react, how it changes their lives, how it changes their perspective, that I find interesting. And look, one of the more interesting cases I had, which was a case that actually made me feel a lot better about my experience about deleting the videos, because I just couldn't get my head around that for the longest time. And the other thing too that I didn't tell you is that when I was deleting the videos, I remember feeling very emotional. I'm a pretty stoic sort of guy. And I remember feeling very heightened and upset and almost shaking and completely outside my normal frame of, behaviour. And so it was traumatic from that perspective as well, because I witnessed myself in that state. So fast forward, I'm interviewing a witness. The witness is down in Victoria, and he was engaging in CE5 stuff, which is like summoning, which I won't do. And I think that is kind of asking for trouble a little bit. I think you've got to be very, very careful with, inviting and summoning are completely different. And he was doing CE5 protocols and summoning craft, and he had a little success. Anyway, he had, after about 6 months of this, he started to get voices inside his head. And he had a voice in his head that said, we're going to come past, at 9 o'clock tonight. And in his head, he said, well, look, I want to get a video. I want the greatest UFO video that's ever been seen. I'm going to blow the lid off this.
I know where this is going.
Yeah. You haven't seen the video, so I did. And he had this internal dialogue with something. And it said, we'll come past at 9 o'clock tonight and you can take the greatest UFO video, but then we want you to meet us down the park and come with us. And he went, yeah, sure. And he made this parlay with whatever it was in his mind. And so at 9 o'clock at night, he's sitting on his computer and he's doing bits and pieces, and he gets a message, we're outside, and he walks out to a little veranda and he's in the inner city, and he sees this golden cylinder like a rod, and it's slowly rotating, and he had Abrahamic sort of text on the outside that rotated with it. And he got this video, and he said the video didn't look exactly like the object. He said it had like fuzzy edges, which is something that we see. And it had fuzzy, but it was amazing. Like he said, you could see the sun glinting off it, and this thing just rolled past. And he went inside and he watched the video like 50 times. Oh my God, it's amazing. And then he sat there, and then 9 o'clock came. And then he started to think about it. Do I go down the park? I've got a wife. I've got a family. This is irresponsible. It's the unknown. I'm scared. What was I thinking? So he doesn't go down to the park. 4 days later, he gets, I think it was the first COVID variant, maybe Delta, and he got really sick. And he was one of those poor people here in Australia that ended up on a respirator, and he ended up going into a deep coma. He was in a coma for about 6 weeks.
Far out.
Yeah. And he's a tech boffin, so he can access all his hard drives and everything off his phone. And when he awoke in hospital, within an hour of waking in the hospital, he doesn't remember why, but he called for his son and said, get me my phone. And he got his phone and he accessed his hard drive and he deleted the video, he deleted it, he got rid of it all. And so in essence, he had a very similar experience to mine.
Yeah, reminiscent.
And he felt all these feelings. He was feeling foolish, he felt guilty, he felt stupid, he felt, he just felt like a failure. Overall, he feels like, quite rightly so, that in his agreement, he made an agreement with them and then he broke the agreement. So he believes that in his coma state, he was given like an interstellar guilt trip to delete the video. But the anguish he suffered because of, one, he missed the chance to go with them. He didn't keep up his end of the bargain. He didn't have integrity. He's lost the video. Like, he's in this big swirl of emotion and he's playing the blame game on himself. And I think that's a really interesting story because I think it says a lot about the human part of this. Yeah, he saw a craft. Yes, he had voices in his head. But really the story is about how he's left now with the rest of his life thinking that he ruined the opportunity. And for me to hear that story from him was actually a healing moment for me, because I was like, oh, this is what they're doing. They're playing the game. And I said to him, you were never ever going to keep that video. Like, I can't ever imagine you getting to keep that. So, you know, that's not uncommon. I've since heard similar stories like that. That's interesting. One of the other ones that I really love, because it enforces how much the topic has changed, is that I was called by a man in his 70s, and he was an old farmer from out the back of Orange. And he put in this report to me, and I got on the phone and we had a good chat. And he said, I was playing cricket about 30 k's out of Orange, and they'd finished playing for the day. They'd had a barbecue fundraise, and it was about 11 o'clock at night, and he was making the 30-kilometre trip home in the dark back to the farm. And as he was driving through farmland, he saw this giant orange orb that was just sitting in the paddock and lifting up and then moving on and sitting down. And he remembered when he was a child, his dad took him out to a farm not far from there and said, this is a saucer nest. Showed him this burnt patch in the ground and said, oh, this is where the flying saucers come, son. So here he is in his 20s and he's driving home and he's seeing this orange light bobbing around. And I'll tell you what, people in country Australia are made different, because I would have promptly pulled up and watched from back there. He drove up and followed this thing, and then it came, as he drove up to it, it came out of a paddock and it went down the road and it just sort of disappeared. So in the middle of the night, 15 kilometres from the nearest house, down a dirt road, back in the 70s Australia, he jumps the fence and he walks into the paddock to investigate where this thing was. As he's in the paddock, now cricket in Australia is played in summer, it's hot, and he's in the paddock and he hears like a scuff on the dirt road, and he looks over, and walking down the road there are two men dressed in woolen suits, hats, identical clothes, identical face, and he goes, these flaming blokes just walked down the road. And I was like, where were they going? He's like, well, there's nowhere to go. He goes, the nearest house was like 15 k's that way, and he goes, this farm's so many thousand acres, there's nothing there. And they walked down the road, and he said, they walked funny, like they were on a string, like a puppet sort of thing. He goes, they were really strange the way they moved. And I was like, okay. Again, it's hard to shock me. I've heard everything now. I'm talking about it and getting ready to ask him questions. He said, no, you're not listening to me. He goes, they weren't human. I've waited 50 years to tell this story. And he goes, they weren't human. And he had been carrying this story around with him. And I said, why are you telling us now? And he said, because he goes, it's safe to now, it's changed. And he said, and soon I'll be in the ground dead. And he said, and I want to share that story. So, they're two stories that sort of stuck with me because of the human element. This bloke that had the cosmic guilt trip, let's call it, he came from a very religious family and had not shared his story with anyone. So he's suffering this on his own. He's feeling guilt, foolishness, and God knows what else, as well as feeling incredibly lonely in his experience. This old bloke was in the same situation. 50 years of feeling alone and wondering what the bloody hell was going on, and now finally he's got the permission. And that's another reason why organisations like Unhidden are such an important imperative. They're probably, in terms of the movement, there's a number of different movements going on at the moment. We've got the disclosure movement, which largely has revolved around entertainment. And even for me, when I got started in this 10 years ago, it was like entertainment. It was like incredible and I couldn't get enough. But that disclosure movement is largely about entertainment. We're seeing that now. And then we've got the financial sector getting involved, where people are working out how they can make money out of this. We're seeing traded funds pop up and everything. But the least sensationalist and the least sexy organisations are the most important, which are like organisations like Unhidden that are trying to engage with government and have medical journals addressed to actually take this seriously so that we can offer care for people so they don't have to suffer in silence anymore. And that's one of the things that really is motivating me.
Yeah, and I would like to speak about Unhidden because I really think it's going to be an important player in the way that we address this topic in the future.
Yeah.
Because given how complex the UFO topic is and what we're talking about with maybe the idea that it is in control and that capturing evidence of it is really out of our hands. And people will say, well, it's all stories. Well, something that's very compelling to me, and this is something that I really try and spend some time doing, is speaking to people like yourself and other people who are in sort of remote areas. These people that have nothing to gain, they are, basically salt of the earth individuals. They don't have people to tell their stories to, and they've experienced quite shocking and remarkable things.
Yeah.
And when they speak to you saying that, this really happened, this wasn't an imagined experience, it wasn't a hallucination, this was real. It's very compelling speaking to these people that really have never told this story before and don't have anything to get out of it other than it's an anomalous experience. And I think the UFO is actually about the human experience. And it's really people like what you're speaking about are the ones who are affected by it.
Yeah.
And we have this stigma in society where we don't accept something that's out of the norm or out of our conceptual, materialistic society that we live in. And it really hurts people, I think. I think there are a lot of people suffering in silence. And an organisation like Unhidden, I think you could probably speak a little bit more about how that's going to change.
Okay.
I think the future.
Yeah, great. Well, the biggest problem with ufology is we've got to start with the end in mind. And the end in mind is we need to get it to the point where we can have an open conversation and we can actually assess where this topic is going and why it is important. And one of the reasons why it is important is that, humans have been doing the same thing for thousands of years. We're fighting for resources. We are battling, evolutionary paranoia about being fed. And there's a fundamental inequity in our society where, the people that, we're wearing shoes that the people that make them can't afford them. The problem is that the people that have the power are never going to give it away, and the people that are altruistically minded are never going to use the tools of power to try and get it back. So before we can even start to move in the direction where UFOs or, say, consciousness and knowledge of non-human intelligence can shift us out of that and sort of break that cycle of fighting over the resources and realising they're actually all human, if we can stop fighting over imaginary lines on maps and the amount of melanin in our skin, before we get to that point where we can sort of reach a resource-free society, we've got to start talking about the topic. And right now it's not even safe to discuss it. So these people that are having what we would call extraordinary experiences, the reason they're so extraordinary is because they feel like they're the only person that's having it. And where Unhidden is about to bridge that gap, and where they're working very, very hard, is that the first step is recognising that while we call them extraordinary experiences, they're not rare experiences. They're not. I would say, look, off of polls that have been done and then fudging the figures, I would probably say about 20% of the population is having some kind of experience they can't explain. And that's a large enough segment of the population to have the discussion if we can make it safe. Where Unhidden comes in is Unhidden really, like those people that are lonely in the experience, that are suffering mentally. And I mean, we know where that goes. If people are suffering and they're holding a secret and they're not supported by their family, it breaks families up, it breaks communities apart. It doesn't lead to anything good. We need transparency around talking about our mental battles and certainly ontological struggles, and that's where Unhidden comes in. Unhidden is about engaging with governments to recognise that, one, the experience of the experiencer is real. We don't have to convince anyone that UFOs are real. We don't have to convince anyone that there is a non-human intelligence. We don't have to convince anyone of anything. All we have to do is have them understand and accept that the people are having experiences that are affecting them, and how do we treat it? It's almost like John Mack, in order for John Mack to get accepted, he never claimed initially that the Yarrell kids had seen, spacemen. He never went out to prove that people were being abducted by UFOs. What he did is he identified the symptoms that people were struggling with, and that the symptoms were real. And that was enough. People are suffering. How do we stop the suffering? And that's where Unhidden really comes into the fore. They're not a disclosure organisation. They're not pushing for whistleblowers or agenda. They're not out to make money. It's a purely altruistic organisation that is driven around having conversations and allowing people to know that A, they're not alone in their experience, and two, how do we get professionals, doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists, and the people that are in charge of the medical institutions that write the manuals and the legislation, and then in end government, how do we get them to accept that this is happening? And that's where Unhidden is making great gains. The people behind it have done a remarkable job of collecting some of the finest names in ufology. So they've got a great foundation for understanding what's going on. They've got incredible credibility coming out of people that have been involved in the topic at a very high level, and that's a cause we need to champion.
I agree. I'm very hopeful for Unhidden, and I think it's going to make a big difference in society, let alone in the field of ufology as well. Yeah. Do you think disclosure is almost a vehicle that Unhidden can utilise to help that's the process?
That's such a good question, because Unhidden is not a disclosure organisation, but it's kind of chicken or the egg. If disclosure comes, and it is what we think it might be, which is a series of questions like dominoes that one question leads to the other. If disclosure comes out the way that, say, Carl Nell would intimate that we have a catastrophic disclosure, it's too late. It's too late. So what Unhidden has to do, and these are the effort that's going on, is to be recognised as the go-to institution, and there's a brilliant white paper actually written in order to be recognised for what they are, so that if disclosure does come out in that way, they'll go straight to Unhidden. So in the absence of any real support from government, Unhidden is churning away behind the scenes to build a framework, a mental health scaffolding system that can be trained to medical professionals across the world. So the longer disclosure takes, the more Unhidden will be able to do. But in saying that, I think that Unhidden have made great gains in sort of mapping out a framework for care, so that if the worm turned tomorrow and catastrophic disclosure is upon us all, well, I'd like to think that Unhidden would be who the governments would go to.
Yeah, because the thing about Unhidden, which I really think is quite inspiring, is that it's not only going to address individuals that have had experiences. There are going to be, I think, inevitably, individuals who are going to be affected by the idea that there is something else here interacting with us. And that we talk about this idea, no, the word is probably being killed, or it's overkill using it in ontological shock. But the idea that there will be a paradigm shift among society, acknowledging that there will be, I think, a lot of people that will have to come to terms with something that is really not on their, it's not in their worldview that has been a part of anything that has been taught up to where they are now.
Look, ontological shock is so funny because people comment on it like they're an authority. Like, there's so many nuts and bolts people that go, oh, it's nonsense, everyone will get used to it. That's a severe lack of imagination, if you really think about what it could be. I've witnessed, one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about ontological shock being addressed, and why, I and you are supporters of Unhidden, and many people we know, is because I've witnessed ontological shock in people as an investigator and as a researcher. I've seen what it does to people. It's real. It is, it's not a clever word. Having your ontology challenged is to have your foundational understanding of what it is to be a human and exist in this frame of existence completely shattered.
Yeah.
And look, Beatrice Villarreal has been talking about this recently. She's been incredibly brave in coming forward with her discovery in her paper. But aside from the outcome of that, what's more interesting in many ways is how she has been, in the face of massive pushback, she's been fighting that while also dealing with her own ontology, her own challenges of what this means for us and what this is. I I'm quite passionate about it from the perspective that I witness what I would coin third-party ontological shock.
Yeah.
So a family member of mine, simply upon hearing of my experience, within a week or so, suffered a mental episode that required medical intervention.
Wow.
And it was again, you would say, do you feel like the phenomena is, basically manipulating us, or I said move us around on the board.
Yeah.
That moved me around on the board in a massive way. To see somebody that I loved affected so profoundly with their worldview changing simply from hearing about my experience, and then I extrapolated that on a worldwide scale, I didn't like where it could take us.
Yeah. Because there's so many uncertainties around the UFO phenomenon, and I think that's a big part of maybe where the ontological shock comes from as well, where we are helping people understand that there are things that are anomalous or can't be explained, but not many people have many answers. And
No.
I think that's going to potentially, that can excite people, but that can also scare people. And similar to yourself, I have seen people who I consider courageous, brave, on top of their game,
Yeah.
be shaken firsthand
Yeah.
by the knowledge of someone else's experience who they trust and know. I've seen them become angry and flustered and scared.
Yeah.
And people will sit here and probably say, watching this, who are maybe skeptical of the UFO topic,
Yeah.
they don't understand, though, that it's actually these experiences that affect everyone.
Absolutely.
Until you know someone or till yourself have seen something,
Yeah.
then this is all just up in the air. But eventually, there is going to be, a select percentage of people around the world that are going to come forward probably once this topic is, destigmatized and it is accepted. And this is going to become common knowledge.
I have an unpopular opinion about disclosure and why it hasn't occurred, and why sometimes it shouldn't occur the way that people think it should.
Mm-hmm.
People are in this, as I said, most people are in this for entertainment, because it's so interesting and it's fascinating, and it's, we've read books, watched movies, and we want to get to the answers, and everyone wants the answers, and it's a distraction from the dreariness of everyday life. And I get that, but you've also got to ask the question. We oversimplify things. We tend to, I think pretty much society as a whole, humanity as a whole, suffers Dunning-Kruger. We sort of completely misunderstand our intellect, intelligence and place in everything, and we kind of, at any point in history, kind of feel like we know everything. We just got to fill in the blanks. And that's just the arrogance and the hubris of humans.
Man, yeah.
And that's just, I think, part of what makes us what we are. But what tends to come, I suppose, back to me in my mind, and I've had people pick me up on this and get quite agitated with this, especially people within ufology that want the answers because I've been studying it for 20 bloody years, and they're like, I can understand, and a great example is your grandfather. We have great honourable people within the military-industrial complex that have gone into these programs that are good, honourable, ethical people. And they've chosen not to talk about it. So you've got to ask the question, why? Is it some moral compass where they look at it and go, yeah, this is a bit spicy, we're not quite ready for this yet? And I think there's a lot of evidence to say that this needs to be a generational slow leak over time, where we want to get into the water, gently and softly. It's not a case of throwing everyone in. And George Knapp said it the best. It was a great podcast where Knapp and Corbell were oppositionary, where Corbell was enthusiastic and saying, no, we need to rip the Band-Aid off and blow the lid off and rah, rah, rah. And George Knapp was far more considerate of it. And he sort of said, well, I don't know if, Grandma wants to know what's going on, and, and you've got to consider that. Like, who are you actually exposing to this if you disclose? It's not for the ufologists, it's the children, it's the old people. It needs to be slow and generational. And I think we've got to drop this. There's a big argument at the moment about amnesty, where people are calling for blood, saying all the terrible horrors that have been committed over the last 80 years need to be accounted for, and
to keep this secret.
To keep the secret, all the secrecy. And I mean, there's been murders and obviously everything between murder and manipulation for 80 years to keep the secret, and people are calling for blood. And I get that. I understand that in the society where justice is a value that we hold high, that's an important thing to address. But is it more important than having the secret brought out in a slow, methodical way? Or is in fact the secret kept a secret for a very good reason, and actually knowledge of it is going to put us in a worse position? Does it enhance the human experience, or does it detract from it? Does it put us in a position of danger? And as some people at one extreme have said, well, disclosure would bring on a reset. You know, a part of the human experience to do with the phenomena is not to know. And then you've got people at the other end which say, well, in order for us to grow as a species, we need to know. And the fact is, we don't know the answer to that. So it's very dangerous. I ask people as a question, if there's a big red disclosure button there, you know, do you push it? Before my experience, my wife will tell you this, but before my experience, before I stood under that thing, I was like, yeah, push it. Let's just push it.
Catastrophic.
Yeah, it will end all wars. We'll come together as humanity. We'll all love one another. And after my experience, I was like, it needs more consideration.
Yeah, it's a really important point I think you make there, because it is easy to get emotional and passionate, especially when we're talking about the idea of maybe if there are technologies that have been basically reverse engineered from potentially unknown craft or technology that could revolutionize the world and maybe stop us from this trajectory that appears to be, you know, harming the planet. Whether people want to make that a political debate or not, that's not what I'm here for. But especially in, you know, different areas of medicine, of science, but there is that aspect which you talk about, which is, you know, what really is the reason for the secrecy, and why has there been such a concerted effort to prevent this from getting out? And you speak about having a family. You know, it's one thing, I think, us just saying blow the lid off and release, you know, let the cat out of the bag.
Yeah.
It's another telling children that there are things that go bump in the night that are real. And children are, you know, impressionable and can be influenced very much.
There is also that argument that says once you start believing it, it grows.
Well, definitely.
There is that
are we bringing it in?
Yeah, there is that Tolpic manifestation side to it as well. And again, what it really comes down to is if you don't know what the button's going to do, you shouldn't be pushing it on for the sake of the rest of humanity, to satiate your own curiosity.
Yes. Well, why do you think it has been kept secret, the UFO topic? What do you think is the reason that disclosure hasn't occurred for 80 years now?
Oh, look, I don't think anything. I've got a million different theories and they all contradict.
Okay.
But I think there's probably, I think if you look at Gary Nolan's sort of, I think Gary Nolan's sort of comment about it being icky, it could be icky. It could be something we don't want to know. We could be some form of sustenance for something else, which, you know, I could get used to that. You know, at the end of the day, one thing that's, you know, awful about being a human is how we consume everything and how awful we are to everything around us, the planet, the creatures, everything else. To find out that we're not actually top of the food chain, in some ways, is a comfort. To find out that we're not wholly solely responsible for fixing global warming and all the problems of the world is a way comforting. It's an abandonment in some ways of responsibility because we're not actually in charge. So knowledge of something like that, where it could be icky, could actually, with a little bit of flexible thinking, be seen the other way. It also makes me feel better about eating things because I'm like, you know, it's fair's fair. I'm now part of the system rather than on top of it. So that's one box. And I can see if that was the case why, you know, if, you know, grandma's being visited by temporal soul-sucking monsters from the planet Rog, you know, don't push the button. So that's over there. I also think that if you look within, there's obviously the definite, you know, obvious thing, which is, you know, power, money, technology hidden in it, but I think it's bigger than that.
Yeah.
Religious-wise, I mean, if you go back to the Abrahamic religions and you talk about the creation of man, if you're looking at it from a religious perspective, you know, read the Tower of Babel. There's always the argument that we weren't meant to be this. We weren't meant to be, you know, just advancing technologically. We weren't meant to be consuming. We were meant to be simpler creatures, and there's that line of it. Between the hard science of the simulation theory, the ickiness of being someone's product or belonging, and then the religious, any one of those things needs that the the answer is complicated and the answer is icky. And if you had a government come out tomorrow and say, ladies and gentlemen, you know, this is all real, well, that's fine, but the questions don't stop.
Yeah.
And eventually what's going to happen is the question is going to come and say, well, we're paying our taxes, can you protect us from it? And we all know what the answer to that question is, and that's uncomfortable. So I think there's a lot of reasons why it's being kept secret. Definitely, I think there's a secret arms race.
Yes.
We're not allowed to talk about Lockheed Martin having craft. That's a hot potato. But I think there's a myriad of reasons why. If I had to get off the fence, I'd say it's icky.
Yeah.
I'd say it's uncomfortable reality that humanity would have to get its head around. And I think without ever really knowing what it is, who's willing to press the button?
Yeah, that's very interesting because you made a reference to the analogy of food and how we consume animals and planets as resources. We don't know what the afterlife is, for example. And when you're dealing with things that seem to overlap with these kind of metaphysical or spiritual aspects of our reality, which are still the frontiers of the unknown for being explored, if there is a secret per se, where it's something like there is a higher intelligence that potentially utilizes spiritual energy as a resource, and we are without, an understanding of what that means or why it happens, it could raise a lot of questions.
Well,
and those are examples that you just could think of.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Well, just take that for example, right?
Yeah.
Just take that little bite-sized chunk, that spiritual energy is a resource.
Yeah.
Let's assume that's true.
Yeah.
How do you now tell the public that spiritual energy is real?
Yeah.
And that something's feeding on you and that you're someone else's property? And I mean, these are concepts that if you've been involved in ufology, even for 18 months, you're probably across. If you've read Vallet's work, if you've read John Keel's work, if you've been down that rabbit hole and you've actually assessed it from you can't get away from that aspect. But to most people that don't even think that it's real, how do you begin to have that conversation? How do you begin to have that conversation in a responsible way? Because your duty as a government is to protect your people. And if by telling them some truth that they're not prepared for is the opposite of protecting them.
Because they can't provide security.
Can't provide security. I can't even provide you comfort, actually. And again, one of the things that strikes me, without talking out of school, is that you and I both know people that are up the top of the food chain. A lot of people. And people have been researching this for years and years and years, in and out of government, in private aerospace, and everything in between. And I am yet to find anyone who has a holistic view of this that makes sense. So if those people don't have it, does anyone have it? And that may be the case. And I know Ross has spoken about this before, and he's intimated, don't assume a conspiracy, assume the stuff up. I would also equate that to assume that they don't know. And if you don't know, then you're better off just being quiet about it. And I think that may be the case.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't think we know what this is. And it could even be a case of maybe secrecy is revolved around trying to explore it.
Yeah.
Like you said, could invite it on more, could bring on this more, it could amplify the phenomenon. The thing that I really want to go back to, which is something that I find really intriguing,
pinning me down,
is the Tower of Babel.
Oh yeah,
which you spoke about. And the reason being is we have a lot of myths and lore, and we go back to the idea of a flood myth, where many cultures and religions almost have this kind of consistent flood myth throughout tales.
Yeah.
The Tower of Babel is very interesting, and there's a symbolic idea where there was essentially man unified in purpose and spirit, and was building this tower to reach the heavens, to become like the gods that had created him. They were striving in every aspect to become what was above them.
Yeah.
And they spoke the same language, and almost as in wrath because of our hubris to think that we could reach the gods struck us down. And through my research, I've come to this sort of understanding that there is a massive connection between UFOs and rockets. and space.
Oh, that's, yeah, okay.
And
it's getting spicy now.
Yeah, and while it is obviously highly speculative,
yeah.
I think from the work that I've done about my grandfather and his experiences,
yep.
through cases that exist around the world about interactions with rockets and UFOs and people going to space, it does seem to symbolically play into this idea that something is monitoring our ability to reach for the stars or reach for the heavens.
Yeah.
And that leads me to ask you the question, where do you think this phenomenon is coming from? Like, do you think there is like a physical component that exists out there in the universe, in another solar system, in another star? Or do you think it is more sort of dimensional or maybe in a different frequency or timeline?
I asked someone last week, I said, what is your, he had a really broad knowledge, and I said, what is your unifying theory of ufology? And he gave me the look I'm about to give you now, which is it's so big and so confusing, and I don't know. I have my own feelings that are subject to change, and I certainly don't want to offend anyone religious. But again, going back to sword and sandal people of the past, thinking they're dim, I mean, they're not. They're the things that were created in the past. I mean, the intelligence, the intellect, it was there. So again, I probably put a lot more credence in historic texts than, I hesitate to call them sacred texts, but historic texts and see the stories within them. I think, you know, if and I don't want to offend any Christians out there, but in terms of, I look at the Old Testament as, you know, it begins with the story of God that creates, or Yahweh, that creates people, and they're simple people. And they're lovely and they're friendly and everything's going great. And he pops into the garden almost like we're dogs, like we're happy to see him, and it's a very simple, lovely life. And then someone breaks into the office on Friday and gives us a little bit of intelligence. And again, that aligns with the Greek myth of Prometheus giving man fire. Yes. It's the same story.
Yeah.
And then, you know, God's pretty harsh on the humans. There's a bit of murder goes on and there's a whole lot of stuff, and he seems to be really oppositionary with us and not really happy with what we've become. And then when we see the Tower of Babel, again, our arrogance, which I would also make the parallel between the Tower of Babel with, and I think it sort of makes reference to this, look at what they can do when they get together, right? Now, I would draw parallels between the Tower of Babel and technology and knowledge. You look at the Bible references to the Tree of Knowledge. Our purpose, it seems, from the Abrahamic text, was not to be knowledgeable. It was to love our families and have a simple life and enjoy what we have. And instead we've become this other thing. And kind of the Old Testament is pretty full on, and God sort of falls in and out of love with us, and he doesn't really come to love us in that sort of way until he lives as a human, as Jesus in that story, where he comes down and goes, oh, this is actually quite tricky being a human. and that's kind of my layman's interpretation of that story. But I would draw a similarity between the Tower of Babel and technology and where we are today with AI. Is AI going to give us knowledge that we're not supposed to have of our own confinement? Is it going to say, hey guys, you're in a fishbowl? And in which case is that, and this is where it ties into the people have that reset narrative where they're like, every time a human society rises, it gets pushed back down. And you're supposed to be here, and inevitably you peak and crest, and then into that people will tie in ancient structures and past civilizations, and then you get down the Graham Hancock track. And again, it's a whole other murky field of study that's interesting. In terms of, without getting into the minutiae or believing any of it and just looking at it allegorically, I think again it's another data point in that it seems like humanity has risen and fallen many, many times. I think that's becoming more and more obvious, that perhaps we've been close to here before. The question is the reset, the great flood myths, things coming out of the sky, all that sort of stuff, is that just part of nature here, or is that, you know, wiping the slate clean and weeding the garden and starting again? And again, if that was a truth, and I know in certain religions that is the truth in the religion, is that's part of what happens. You have the apocalypses. Is that something that everyone needs to know? If it's going to happen anyway, should you be enjoying the time with your family and, you know, rather than worrying about what's coming down the road? That if that was a truth, then, that would make sense. The secrecy would definitely make sense. What do I believe in terms of? I believe at this point in time, subject to change at a later date. I believe there's a creator. I never used to. When I was young, I was probably scientifically hubristic, dogmatic almost, in that, religion was for people that couldn't think for themselves, and science has all the answers. But there seems to be a bell curve in this field of study, which is everybody comes into it with a religion down the bottom, getting more and more sciencey, and eventually when they look, and the deeper they go, they get to the top and they're like, oh no, it's all God. We'll come back down. And we see that time and time again.
With spiritual transformation.
Yeah, the spiritual transformation. And we see that with a lot of, I think a lot of scientific research, a lot of people go that way. I think there's a creator. I don't necessarily think that our evolution adds up. I don't think we've got enough data to say that we were manipulated 160,000 years ago. I also don't think there's enough evidence to say we evolved as the narrative that you and I were taught at school says. I don't think we know enough to make a decision either way.
Agreed.
But I would probably at this stage lean on the Tim Taylor, the purported Tim Taylor theory of there's a creator up the top that created everything, and then a lot of what we experience here, either corporeal, non-corporeal, everything comes under that. And I don't have enough knowledge data to say what it is, other than it could all be the one thing, it could all be different things. And then of course you've got the other wheel out there from sentient plasma and other theories around that. And then you can throw in Rizwan's work or Hoffman's work around collapsing wave functions and we creating the world as we walk through it. It really gets murky. So I think it's really the biggest enemy of knowledge is belief. As soon as you go, well, that's definitely true, you just shut the door on so many other things. So part of, I think, what's important is to just go, it could be any number of one of these things, and I'm open to it all, and I'm going to try and hold this swirling soup of contradictions in my mind until it clarifies. Yeah, that's a terrible answer, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. No, look, and I know I would probably say the same thing if I'm in your shoes and I'm on the other end of the question. It really is like that. You touched on the simulation theory there. There's something which we see with UFOs where they appear to almost be able to embody a physical structure.
Yeah.
But then also maybe potentially something more etheric or maybe a wave of light.
Yeah.
And that plays into the idea of, we go back to the double slit experiment, where a potentially a atomic particle can exist as a particle or a wave of light.
Yep.
The phenomenon itself seems like it's almost transcended physical reality, or comes from maybe a different plane of existence.
Yeah.
Do you think that the displays where it, like you saw in your experience, where it seemed to join together with another UFO, or it can move through a physical object?
Yep.
Do you think that is more leaning towards the idea of something that is outside of the simulation and can manipulate it, or something that has come from the simulation and transcended it?
I rather than use simulation, because as soon as we start talking about simulation, everyone talks about Grand Theft Auto, and it takes on not if you're an NPC. I think when we talk about simulation theory, people tend to, especially with Rizwan's work as well, because he is a game developer, but he's so much more than that. But people start to think about it in terms of a game. Simulation doesn't mean necessarily a game. I prefer to use the word construct. Like, it's a created world that's probably curated and controlled. Mm-hmm. Again, we use things like existing in a computer because that's our only frame of reference. But again, we've got no idea what's outside of that construct. So from that perspective, I think that some of the contradiction between physical craft and non-corporeal stuff, I don't necessarily think they are a contradiction. I think that, if you read Flatland, the book Flatland, which is, the interdimensional love story of 2D people, that's a really elegant answer to what goes on as well, is if you have things in a higher dimension, like, you just cannot recognise what you're seeing. Yeah. Also, 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions, the number is 1 up, goes 2 to 3, but it's not, the information isn't 1 up, the information is so much more. I don't know if it's squared, I'm not a mathematician, but the information that goes from 3D to 4 dimensions or 5 or whatever above us, just so far beyond our frame of reference, we could never understand it. I think that if some of these craft, because the big argument from people is, if they're so advanced, why do they crash? Well, the answer one is that they don't necessarily need to be more advanced than us. They just need access to different science. They may not be spiritually or medically more advanced. That could be all. We don't know that. But one of the questions that's answered, if they're so advanced, why do they crash? I don't think they crash necessarily. I think some may crash, but I think probably they're disposable. I think that it could be a way for a higher dimensional life form to exist or to experience via an avatar in a lower dimensional space. And again, I'm not a physicist, but that would be my layman's understanding of what's going on. And I think a lot of the time, again, just through witness testimony of people that have come across beings, allegedly come across beings in discarded craft, is that they're not really an entity of their own. They're kind of like just we hear biological robot all the time.
Biological drone, yeah.
Yeah, so if you and I wanted to have an experience in 2 dimensions, I'm a 3-dimensional person with heart, lungs and everything else. I can't go there, but perhaps my consciousness could affect an avatar in that dimension and experience it. So I kind of think that's probably some of it. That'd be the best answer I could give you. But I think that the biggest part of this is we need to get comfortable and we need to finally face up to the fact that we're probably the smartest dumb thing on this planet, and we just don't know what we don't know. And our biggest enemy, the biggest enemy to knowledge we have, is knowing stuff already. We don't really know anything.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. And the point you make about this maybe being some form of higher intelligence that can maybe manifest or materialize an entity or a craft as some sort of tool to interact or communicate with us. I think we have to be open to that possibility. There's something else which is really curious though, and this makes me wonder about what's going on with the phenomenon, and it's this connection with the ocean. And it's very easy for us to sort of dive into the idea that this maybe is all a design, and everything that we're actually witnessing with UFOs and the phenomena is essentially created to interact with us with a specific agenda in mind from something else that we don't understand. But also, I like to think about how old the ocean is, and in the sense that life started in the ocean a long, long time ago, and we look at how life actually sort of had an amphibious transition to land. And it was only a certain period of time later that, us as hominids appeared on the continent. But we think of ourselves as the apex predator on the land. But what's not to say, since life started in the ocean, that there was something that maybe reached our, say, biological evolution or technological evolution a lot longer ago? Because at the same time, there could be another species potentially in tandem with us. But maybe they reached a point of intelligence before us because life started in the ocean, they've had more time. You said your craft looked organic, almost in the sense that you viewed it, and there was a connection with the water. What do you think about the idea that there could actually be a non-human or another intelligence living in the ocean?
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a fabulous question. And I think my case, I'm going to be so careful because I can't be objective about my own case because I'm in it.
Yeah.
I always think about the fact that 2 weeks before I was like, holy moly, a triangle would be terrifying. And then I saw one.
Yeah.
I also think about the leg that I saw behind the shed was straight out of the movie Science. It's tailor-made for me. Yeah. So I think that trickster high strangeness elements in play. In terms of stuff in the ocean, if we talk about the construct, it might not be that our planet is the construct or simulation. Right? It could be that the observable universe is, a construct, and all the other creatures that are in that universe might be dealing with the same thing that we're dealing with. They don't really understand the nature of their own reality. They could be as, in the dark as we are. So I, again, not being as clever as I want to be, I don't understand. Obviously, it's harder for creatures to evolve intelligence. If our understanding of evolution is sound, and I have my doubts, but it also says that fire, has really helped promote us to the top of the food chain and discovering that. And obviously under the water, that's pretty tricky. but also, Earth's been around for a long time. We've been here for 10 minutes, you know, and nearly all the technology and stuff that we're so fascinated with and we're so pleased with ourselves has all been invented in the last, you know, 200 or 300 years. So let's wind back the clock a couple of 100 million years. There's a lot of time for a lot of things to go on just on this planet, let alone creatures, species, life forms to evolve on other planets. And they've had plenty of time to get here. And one thing that's been theorised is that this is not a land planet. This is a water planet.
Yes, 2/3 water.
Yeah, and it's not 2/3 water. It's a lot more than that, because land, you stand on the land and we build structures. But in the water, it's deep.
Yeah.
So there's so much more space to occupy dimensionally as well in the water. So it's actually so much bigger than we even think. So it's also been theorised that if you're going to travel, you know, from planet to planet, it makes sense to build craft because liquid is more stable, it is more understandable, it's more definable than
Trace elements are the same.
Exactly. So that sort of makes sense to me. There's definitely a lot of stuff associated with the water, but then again, you know, 80% of humans live on the coastline.
Yes.
So it stands to reason that there's more observable things near the ocean. There's plenty of triangular craft and everything else in between seen in the middle of the desert as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't put any credence at all in the fact that what I saw looked like a sea creature.
Yes.
Because I haven't, if 50 other people had seen it, then it would make more sense to me, but I don't put any credence into that. I think that there's probably almost certainly, like Tim Gallanet's testimony about things in the ocean, all the stories of things in the ocean, it's a great place to hide.
Yeah.
So I definitely think there's a lot going on under there now.
Yeah, well, we're a fish out of water when we're in the ocean.
Yeah, exactly.
We're slow, you hear us coming from a long way,
Yeah.
and we can't reach certain depths because of the pressure.
Yeah.
And like you said, you know, I think there's, you know, 1 in 5 stars have an ocean planet in the Goldilocks zone potentially.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Or the ability to harbour water. I think 1 in 5 stars,
Yeah.
which means, yeah, if there was potentially something that came from
Yeah.
another solar system or another planet, yeah, maybe the ocean would be a good place if that's their natural environment.
The other thing too is, from my perspective as a researcher,
Yeah.
I don't have the ability to research the ocean.
Yeah.
So fundamentally, all the research that I do is either, you know, if it's on the coast, it's still on land. I have had an experience on the water. We were sailing back from Nemea, the family and I, and we saw orange orbs.
New Caledonia.
Yeah, we saw orange orbs come out of the water that interacted with us, and it was actually strange because my daughter at the time started talking to them. And she's like, come closer, and it rushed the ship. And it came from maybe 2 kilometres out. I mean, it's hard to tell at sea. And it came straight up 50 metres off the balcony on the ship and sent us both flying back into the room like it was playing with us.
Yeah.
So I've had interactions on the water, and plenty of people do, but it's not my area of expertise, that's for sure.
Yeah, you speak to that a little bit there with your daughter, talking to it, and you hear that as well, where people have said that it almost plays to thought.
Yeah.
This goes into the area of consciousness. Do you think that potentially the UFO or the phenomenon is some form of trigger, or it's trying to essentially initiate a consciousness shift amongst us? Because if we go back historically and we look at cases, whether you could say the airships, the Foo Fighters, the ghost rockets, whatever it is, Ezekiel's wheel, flaming shields, there seems to be this idea that the UFO is trying to let us know that things may not be as prosaic, or the universe may not be as simple as we appear, and that there are things that aren't possible.
Yeah.
And it presents these sort of displays to sort of tweak us into thinking that, like my analogy is a Rubik's Cube. Yeah. Like, is it trying to get us to solve a problem that we don't yet understand?
Well, my favourite book of all time is written by an experiencer that most people don't know was an experiencer. They don't know this person was an experiencer, and that's Arthur C. Clarke. Okay. And Arthur C. Clarke was quoted as saying, if you've never seen a UFO, you're not looking, because he's seen plenty of them. And obviously he wrote 2001 and Rendezvous with Rama. And I mean, that's the story of 2001. It's basically, you got monkeys that are walking around yelling at each other, and they drop the monolith, and that inspires the intelligence. And before you know it, there's another one on the moon, and when they find that, it sends the signal. So it's like it's a marker to sort of measure our way and inspire us and measure our progress. I kind of like that concept, and it also has a benevolent factor to it that something is helping us. I really like the idea of that, and I definitely think there is an aspect to that, but I don't think it's all encompassing as well. As much as I would love wholeheartedly to say that they affect our consciousness for the good, and certainly my experience, but I know for some people it's sent them down a long road of heartache, and so the theory that they're all knowing, all seeing, and it kind of gets hung up there a little bit, because you do see suffering in relation to this. But in terms of inspiring people, you can look at people through history, grand people through history that have achieved amazing things, and you can tie it back to one event that sent them on their path, something that gave them that sliding doors moment where they chose a different fork in the road. And Ezekiel is a great example of that. He's sitting out in the desert, he's grumpy, he's cranky, he's unhappy with his people at the time, and then he has this amazing experience, and he goes back and starts bossing everyone around about how to be better. Basically turns him into a bossy person. It's great. But I definitely think that overwhelmingly is the experience that people have. Is it changes them, it broadens their mind, and maybe it is a case of slowly just nudging society forward in that way. There is also, and I do think that this is the case, is Gary Nolan's work talking about the basal ganglia and how that can be enlarged in some people that have had experiences.
Put
Yeah, I can't say it. I call it the Hakuna Matata.
Everyone has a different pronunciation.
Yeah. I just go straight.
I like that.
The one thing that we've spoken about, a number of investigators have spoken about, is typically the people that we get that are able to describe their experience and speak to us about it are generally pretty sharp. It tends to be, I think, a lot of people that are on the autism spectrum in some degree, ADD, ASD. I think there's I don't think it's proportional to neurotypical people. I think a lot more people that we would associate with having autism or somewhere, and I'm on that scale as well. I have Asperger's and ADD. They tend to make up a much larger group of experiences, and I think just typically, sharp people. Sharp people marry sharp people, as Nolan said. They have sharp kids, and then they seem to have these family things. I think that's a dangerous thing to discuss, because then you start to talk about, is it speciation? Is it a case that there's an evolutionary change where specific groups of people that are chosen evolutionary
becomes elitist,
and it becomes elitist, and that's not what this is about for people like you and me. What this is about for people like you and me and people like us is that we want this to be able to show us how we can look at the world differently and how we can come together as a species and be better and sort of solve inequity and basically look inside more. And so I think we've got to be very careful with looking at it, who sees them and why. And I think, as I said when we started speaking, delusions of grandeur. People can get delusions of grandeur with this and say, well, I'm the chosen one, they chose me.
You see it so often, don't you?
Yeah. And that can get out of hand, and that's a really unhealthy way to look. It actually separates you from society, which is not what we were about.
No, and it is a big problem, I think, with the phenomenon and people that do engage with it, because it's very easy to look into things too much, in the sense that we are, sort of seeing potentially threads being pulled that maybe do have an intention, like you said, to nudge someone a certain direction.
Yeah.
But then you can start to assume every decision could be based off something else that is not that is more than a coincidence, that these serendipities are sort of designed by the phenomenon.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask, do you think that, as we've spoken about with the whole kind of divine, joyous side and maybe guiding us in our consciousness to a higher level, do you think there's the other end of the spectrum as well, where maybe potentially societies and cultures being divided and warring and fighting could be the work of, without it sounding obviously, too out there, that there are entities or intelligences that are
that want us to war,
that are essentially influencing people without taking people's accountability away from themselves.
Yeah.
But there are essentially moments in time and history which are utilised by a higher intelligence to influence the trajectory of our planet for the worse.
Yeah. Look, there's definitely that narrative. I hate that narrative.
Yeah.
But again, I hate that narrative because I don't want it to be true.
Yeah.
It's not data based. It's literally my own.
Yeah, we don't want to think.
I don't want to think of it. I'm like, that can't be true. But yeah, I'm open to that, and certainly other people have alluded to that to that fact that they want us to war, that they can. There's been people that they feed off the negative emotion, or it's to keep the population in control, or a million different things. I mean, that would be a pretty good reason to keep it secret. If the fact is, if we're trapped in this awful society where we're basically being used as pieces on the chessboard for war and suffering, I mean, I'm not pushing the red button. You know what I mean? It's not a nice thing. I've never seen anything to lead me to believe that's the case.
Yeah.
I've never spoken to anyone. No, I can say that 100%. I've never spoken to anyone in my circle of, I was going to say circle of trust, my circle of trust that that would infer that's the case.
Yeah. I think it's a hopeful answer, and I hope that that's the case as well, because it does as well. Like I obviously don't believe that. It's just something that I think it's we have to consider all options in the sense of
and it is on the table. Like that is where this gets tricky. Is that you can't close the door to any possibility. You've got to try and maintain an open mind to all of it. But yeah, that would be an awful. If that was the truth, that would be awful. And then we do think, like we start to think about. Colm Kelleher, who says he said at times that he wishes he could forget what he knew. You talk about Hal Puthoff, or Jim Semivan last week saying he was told it's unpalatable. You do hear that narrative coming through, and of course that could be a method of control coming from the security state.
Yes.
Oh no, it's terrible. Let's not talk about this. But I tend to think there is probably some truth to that, even if it's just a case of that the government can't give clear answers and provide security and mental safety. But how nefarious, how dark it could be. Like, I've led a wonderful life. I've been allowed to have a family, enjoy hobbies, travel places, and have amazing things. That's not the work of a creator that wants me to suffer. That's the thing. What I'm more about is I think there's an inequity. It shouldn't be right that you and I get to live wonderful free lives when other people on the other side of the planet don't, and there's enough resources for us all. So that argument would hold up if we were all suffering all the time, and we're not. We're not. I think we need to use the knowledge of a non-human intelligence interacting with us to come together as a species and say, let's look after one another. And that is, as much as you have the threat narrative, we also, at the other end of the spectrum, have the love and light narrative, which is, you guys are great, but you need to learn to get along. Like, it is a subjective response, but I really want that to be true. And so that's sort of where I would hope we would end up, that it would bring us together.
Yeah, I think we need it as well, in a sense. I think that the world is in a tough place. We're very fortunate where we live, and people that we know that, we aren't, in a war zone, or where there's a water crisis, or there's, essentially a famine going on, right? In particular places with different areas and different conflicts.
Yeah.
I just want to touch on something probably to close out, and that's this idea where we come from and where we live, but also the people that inhabited this land first in Australia.
Oh yeah, great.
So the Indigenous culture, right? And it's controversial, and I think it's sensitive to start to make connections between maybe Indigenous cultures and their interpretations of their own explanations for the way the universe works. But there's something very powerful about the dreaming and the lessons that are sort of encoded there, and this idea that this sort of universe has other aspects or energies or portals or unexplained entities or phenomena that exist, that coexist around us.
Yeah.
And they see the world like that.
Yeah.
And culturally, through basically Western coercion, we have tried to force our worldview on these cultures. But it almost seems now, with the awakening that is the sort of UFO topic and the phenomena, that we're more going back to actually these kind of, traditional Indigenous native worldviews.
Yes.
And do you think that the phenomenon and the UFO topic could potentially validate and inspire a reawakening within Indigenous cultures in Australia to engage with this topic, as sensitive and maybe as controversial as that sounds?
Yes, I think absolutely, yeah. I think so. I think that one thing that's happened, and I mean, I would actually go one step further and equate that as a running in a parallel to the Tower of Babel story. I think that there's clear indications throughout history that being pleasure-seeking mammals, getting away from hard work and relying on technology has in some ways given us comfort, but it's actually driven us apart from each other. So with social media, we're more connected than ever before, but we're also more distant, more lonely than before. I think that part of the story through a lot of religions, you've got to get back to the fundamentals, and that's where you're quite right. We typically, as Westerners, have come in and treated native cultures as our intellectual inferiors, and they have got something that we don't. They have an understanding and they have a symbiotic relationship with the land that we don't have, and we need to relearn that. And you do experience that when you spend time among these cultures. You do experience that, and there is a simplicity to being out in the bush and sharing a meal under the stars. We've become absolutely enthralled with this technological world that we've created. And I mean, I'm a gadget guy. Like I love in many ways innovation and clever ideas, and I'm as bad as anyone. But absolutely, I think it's taking us further away from our consciousness. And you cannot have a moment to spend time with your inner self or your consciousness if you are surrounded with beeping, whirring gizmos, gadgets and things that demand your time. So I think that is where this is heading. I think that all roads with UFOs lead to consciousness, and native cultures know more about consciousness. They've forgotten more about consciousness than we'll ever know.
Yeah, fantastic answer. Yeah, I think that's brilliant. And I really hope that this topic can teach us a bit of humility.
Yeah.
But also, like I said, really unite these cultures that sort of, I guess, have been ostracised and I guess, left out in the cold, for the wrong reasons.
I think if this is a topic that interests people, and I think the rules are to park your ego, check your hubris, check your ego at the door, have a completely open mind, don't believe anything, just try and hold it all in there, and be open-minded to older cultures. And then the only other thing that I'd say with investigating or researching it is, you need to take breaks. Yes. Because everyone that you know and love exists in this world, in the three-dimensional world where time moves this way, and you seeing is believing it, and you still have to spend time there, because that's where everyone that's important to you is generally living. And you don't want to lose perspective on that moving forward.
Yeah, it's easy to become all consumed with this topic, and it almost feels like that's your life. But exactly, you need to be present, you need to be here, and these are the things that ground us.
Don't become a UFO hermit.
yeah, exactly. Final question. What do you hope the UFO topic brings to society in the next 5 years?
5 years, that's tricky. In the next 5 years is hard. I mean, looking down the road, I've never thought short term. I've literally never thought about myself as being... I mean, everyone wants to be like the Rosa Parks of ufology. They want to have the defining moment where they can attach their name to it. I've never been about that, and I don't think any of the people that are doing meaningful work in it are like that. I feel like we're a team of people that see this as a large social movement. And any social movement, whether we look at, women's lib, or we look at any racial segregation issues, votes, any social issues that for you and I are a moment in the history book. For the people that lived through, say, the emancipation in America, it was It was a huge, long time, and it took decades and decades and generations to fix that. I don't see this as being any different. I don't expect any massively fast change. I literally see us as we are kicking the ball down the pitch for the next person.
Yeah.
And I think if we attach, and I think a lot of people do attach their own meaning and self-esteem to success, I don't think we can look at it like that. I think we've got to look at this as a long game, and just to be a part of it is a privilege. And I'd like to think in the next 5 years, at the very least, governments would start engaging with organisations like Unhidden and realising that this is going to become a social issue and something that we need to address, and that any form of transparency or disclosure needs to be slow and deliberate and planned and thoughtful. That's what I would hope, but we'll see what happens.
Stunning answer, mate. That's fantastic. Yeah, I agree. And I hope that we'll be there together to see it.
We will be there together. Thank you, mate.
I appreciate it, mate. This has been great.
I've had a great time. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Fantastic. Thanks, mate.
You're very welcome.